Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing discussion of the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Adele Packer, Lavana Tennan, and Daniel Gill. I have a little treat, I guess. I guess we could put this under Stan Tenen trivia. And now this has little to do with the research. So I'm saying that right now because if I don't, Lavana will. It has to do more with Stan's frame of mind, his way of thinking, his way of seeing the world, and looking at some of the basics of religious, not only Jewish but religious study. So let me play this. A little background. This was done shortly after I met the Tennens at an all-night Shavuot gathering in Marin. This is 1986. I met Stan. A few days later, he came over to my place in San Francisco. I had just gotten a camcorder, so I set it up. So this is in my place in the city. Now, this discussion has to do with the 10 Commandments and the Torah. This is Dan's take on that. Let's see.
His take in 1986, remember?
In 86, correct.
The legends say that the Torah is written in black fire on white fire, and that you can read it in the white on the page, which is just as holy as the black letters. That's strange. The legends say that when Moses got the tablets, they had writing on all four sides. What does that mean? 4 edges? No, there are 4 sides to a tetrahedron. And the word tablet only means surfaces. It doesn't say what shape the surface is. They could very well be 2 tetrahedra that when stuck together form a Mogen David.
Right.
Now, that's a volume. And the letters were written on this volume in black fire on white fire, and you could read them clear through to the other side. You could see through the thing. Well, the only form of writing I know of that could be legitimately described as fire, light, and can be read from either side is a holographic plate. Now, I'm not saying God gave Moses a holographic plate, but I'm saying the description fits and some of the same properties may hold. The tablets were supposed to have been understood, spoken, in 70 languages simultaneously, so everyone on earth could have understood them if they wanted to. Well, there's only one form of language I know of that's universal: picture language. And in fact, holographic plates would yield pictures, and if there were 2 of them, and you were looking at a hyperholographic system, then it would produce a stream of pictures. It would be a hologram that had both spatial and temporal information. It would extend in space as well as in time. The Torah is black fire and white fire also. The Torah, by that description, would make sense, and I'm making a technical metaphor. I'm not saying it actually is this, but I'm saying because it's closely related, there may be some parallel things we can do to Torah that we would think of doing to a hologram. If the Torah is a holographic plate, and it's a hyperhologram, then when you look into that hologram, you would not just see around, say, a rose that might be pictured there, but be able to see the rose grow from a bud to a flower until it threw off new seed. It would be holographic spatially and temporally. And so, in fact, looking at these plates that Moses got from this transcendent source would, by this conception, be understandable as a 3-dimensional motion picture involving the feelings and the sensations of anybody watching it without any need for our 2-dimensional language, 1-dimensional language, who knows.
Now the end, where I think it is based around that last statement that we're stuck in this 2-dimensional perspective. And think about if religion were taught from this perspective on a multi-dimensional level, because he, as always, Stan's looking for the universal meaning. of these ideas. I mean, this is mind-blowing. For 1986, nobody else is talking about these subjects. We certainly didn't learn this at Hebrew school. I mean,
Nope.
It's a really good insight, not so much to most of the specifics examples that he was using, although the idea of hyperhologram, it is a good insight as to the way he thinks or thought, the way he was looking for things that fit together. And so in that sense, it's rather than being trivia, it's quite illuminating in terms of, what was his basic approach? How was he looking? How was his mind working? And it's actually all, if you follow what he's saying, it's actually all encapsulated in that little clip.
yeah, what do you think about that, Daniel?
Oh, I mean, that's I never cease to be amazed. I mean, that's just, I never heard an idea like that. But the thing is that that here is yet another subject that I didn't know we ever talked about that deserves serious research. I mean, what he's talking about here is an incredible idea. That the Torah is this, and it seems to, like you said, Lavon, it seems to, like, a lot of the later ideas seem to kind of support this. It's this multi-dimensional, beyond 3-dimension, like it reaches into all dimensions and all time periods, and like and all perceptions, which so much of his work is about, how the perceptual world, and on many levels. So it's like, here's yet another idea that just I mean, it needs to be researched. This is, I mean, a temporal, hologram. I mean, that's embedded within an ancient text. I mean, again, like, all the bells go off. My spine starts tingling. I go, what? Wow.
Yeah. And actually, just in the context of our discussion from last week about, or a discussion, perhaps this is a discussion, Daniel, that you and I had separately.
Yeah.
That one thing that I personally appreciate about what's known as Jewish learning, studying the text and so on, is that it involves you in studying as if they're contemporaries, people and sages from many, many different eras. And so it's a conversation in a sense that transcends time, that crosses, that's simultaneous no matter when people were living. And just the fact that such a tradition of how to study, how to learn, evolves and grows from this single document, which Stanley was thinking of as this, what he called in that little clip, a hyperhologram, something where the times are simultaneous, crossing. Anyway, that really, that's another thought.
It almost forces us to look at maybe some of the early writings over the centuries. And obviously they didn't have the same references, but they were trying to explain things. They perhaps intuitively got these concepts, but they didn't know how to speak in terms of dimensionality. And so they were explaining it in ways that maybe today we're not quite understanding. But if we put this lens that Stan's showing us on some of those other ancient writings, maybe we'll be able to extract the ideas that they were trying to present and kind of meld in, and then bridge the time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I just I mean, you're right. It opens up another level of study that, and if you're a young person today watching this, I think you're getting this now. that, unlike those of us who were brought up to look at things two-dimensionally and do what we're told and follow literally what we're being presented, you have an opportunity to explore this and use what Stan's talking about. And I'll try to find more of this, and see, where he gets into this a little bit more, because in the later presentations, he was focused on what he had discovered. And, kind of, although he is always talking about the various dimensions and how to look at things multidimensionally.
Because that's how he saw them.
That's right.
And, I think that I'm guessing, but I think that in today's environment, it's much more reasonable for people to speculate in terms of multidimensional, simultaneous time. People are, into some ways, accustomed to inhabiting those worlds, in mind space or in movie space or whatever. That the idea that time is not just sequential, or doesn't have to be, at least in mind space, I think is something that's a lot more accessible now than it would have been in earlier eras in most societies. People, anyone who's writing something down, and I'm thinking of, the writings through the centuries and millennia, they're going to use, if they need to use metaphor, they're going to use metaphors that will be familiar to them and to the people for whom they are writing. And it's up to us to penetrate those metaphors and see what they were really talking about, what they were attempting to describe in the language of their era and their society, and to make those connections in terms of how we understand them. And in that regard, as someone who's dependent on translations of this material, I always find it really interesting to compare translations, as you do with contemporary material anyway, and see, where the intersections are, where the differences are, to try and penetrate what's actually people are actually trying to describe. And that's actually something that Stanley did in the early eras of his research as well. He often in the early videos talked about spending 10 years just trying to find descriptions of this idea that he had, and reading thousands of books, some of them written in green ink, yada, yada, yada. If you have watched his videos, he told that story. But that was what he was attempting to do, was to try and hone in on what was actually being talked about by people who were writing in different eras and for different societies.
Right.
Well, he saw it. I mean, you see here, like there's a metaphor Rabbi Nachman uses for being small-minded, which is if you're standing far away from a mountain, you can take your thumb and this tiny little thing block out the whole mountain. So what ends up happening, it's a great like spiritual metaphor, the universal really. What ends up happening, we've had such a long history and there's so much literature that, these books and these ideas, these broad thinkers are almost like we almost don't even know how to recognize them anymore. And Stan, we were lucky to have known him, was one of these deeply broad thinkers, And so anyway, I just wanted to just add that in, so, and like you said before, Bill, if you're young and interested and broad thinker, you've come to the right place.
Adele or Michael, do you have any thoughts on?
I just wanted to say how remarkable his mind is. How many times have I heard about the tablets or seen even, visual artist rendering of 2 tablets, and never occurred to me that there's a possibility that the sides could be as wide as the front and the back, and that something greater in terms of its dimension and putting them together and the shapes they could form would have new meaning, just to open your mind to that. Like, how did that even jump into his mind? And and there's plenty that he said that already just went over my head. Like, I have to hear that again. You know? So
You can play it back after I publish it. Yeah.
yeah. So it just seems like even his metaphors, like how he saw a hologram and how we could just maybe open our minds to new ways to look at what's in front of us.
Right.
You know, whether it's a Torah or a tree, it's really so.
Or is a tree.
It's so opening to hear him speak from a place of total open your mind to whatever comes in and really look at something freshly.
Yeah. At that particular point in time, neither one of us had much of any Jewish background in terms of learning. So what he was putting together from what he could access, including his own kind of technical mathematical training in mind, which is why the geometry came in there a little bit, because that's his background. That's why he thought of hologram, because that's his background. He knew how holograms work because he worked with them.
Excuse me, is Shavuos discussing the Ten Commandments?
Yeah, that's the giving.
Okay, so this was a week after spending
That's right.
an all-night session.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that night.
So it was pretty, in his
Yes.
thinking at that point.
Mhm.
Michael, did you have a comment?
The only time that I've ever thought about or heard about the structure of the physical Ten Commandments is where they explained that whatever finger of light, God, a laser, something, would carve a letter in, it went all the way through.
Mhm.
And that was how it was explained to me, that on the tefillin, the phylacteries, you have a shin on one side with the 3 lines of the letter shin, and a 4-staff shin on the other side. Because when you have 3, we see 1, 2, 3. If you drill, so what do you drill? There's a stone. So this is stone, this is stone, this is stone. So to make it look like that, you would have to drill 2 lines to make the 3. But in fact, to see all 3, you need 3 spaces, because you're looking at a space. And therefore you would need a 4-letter shin to see a 3-letter shin, which was, took our minds in school and tried to put your head around that. But the thing that I never have heard or would even ponder, that it was a hologram, certainly not a hyperhologram, which I'm not sure what that means. All I know is, everybody, you're right, Lavana, we think in multidimensional, the multiverse these days. And there was another Stan Lee, who started in with all of the multiverse. I don't know what it is about the name Stan, looking at holograms, but there seems to be something there. But a hologram was explained to me, and it refers to this, like you take batter and you put an egg in the middle of the batter, you can see the egg, but no egg is in the batter. Now you whip it up, now there's egg everywhere. If you send it to a lab, it'll tell you from any part of that batter, there's egg there, but you can't see the egg. So everything is distributed throughout the whole, which would mean that every letter, in theory, following that idea, every letter of the Ten Commandments would have in it all the Ten Commandments.
Mhm.
Because it's holographically distributed. So we say there are 10 sphirot in the universe, but the 10 are 10 times 10 because each one has the other 9 in it. There are 620 letters in the 10 Commandments, which is 613, the number of commandments in the Torah, and 7 rabbinic ones, the major ones. that were added together. And 620 refers to the word as the same number as crown, keter, the highest of the sfirot, and the crown of that the king of the universe who created it wears, so to speak. It's the source of super consciousness. Well, if that's the case, then every letter in there is a hologram for all the other letters. And there are 620 of them. And then your mind starts going, as it often does when I'm watching tapes of Stan or when I talked with him or even reading. But there you're down in the two-dimensional and you kind of get locked in a book.
Well, if you think about it, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, once you get to 3 dimensions and it's alive and moving, then it's 4 dimensions because there's time involved, and suddenly you take off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's very inspiring to hear it. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what the
tension with the transcendent source should be. It shouldn't be 2-dimensional, because in 2 dimensions we're flatliners then, and we're never getting past the horizon. Go ahead, Lamana, you had a
Yeah, just taking a step further, or taking off from the idea that that if it's a holographic text, then every letter is contained within every other letter. And I'm probably bobbling what you said, Michael, but then think about it. The hand model, which I can't reach, but whatever.
oh, go ahead, grab it.
Okay.
You gotta see it.
Okay. Let's bring these closer.
Yeah, we should have these ready to go every time.
Yeah, the hand model is something that will display all of the letters. All of the letters are contained within this model.
Holographically. Yep.
Yeah.
What about this idea, and we've heard this, I'm sure we've all heard this before about, sorry, black letters on white, or black fire on white fire. This is something we've all heard about. The idea that it's not the white, it's really the black. How do we best explain this concept?
Well, there's there is, I think, an interesting law concerning a Torah scroll, that if some of the white is covered up, you can't actually read from it. So meaning the white is like practically important. The white has to be absolutely blank. So that's a very interesting thing. There's one rabbi still living now, the Biala Rebbe, who has a beautiful piece on the black fire being the like contemporary law-driven kind of conservative look at Judaism. Do this, don't do that, eat this, don't eat that. The Sabbath starts at 4:18 and 27 seconds or whatever. And that the white fire is actually the Torah of the Messianic age. Mm. And it's a really cool idea. And that the people, it's really beautiful. He says, like, the people you meet who are satisfied with the black letters, should have great respect for people who aren't. Meaning when you meet someone who's seems like they're not so interested, it's that the person is interested, but they're interested in something much deeper than just the status quo. They're interested in something super broad and super big in this white fire. And so he says, actually, that those people who are, and this is a big deal in Israeli society right now, as an aside, those people who are, not religious, so to speak, and in Israel, that's a big deal right now, this kind of conflict between secular and religious. He says those people who are not religious are actually on a much higher level than as he's talking about himself and his group, than we are as observant or religious Jews. And so you must, it's a very, I think, quite a beautiful take on it, that there's recognizing from, a pretty well-established leader that there's something really broad and beautiful that's in a way beyond some of the current religious practice.
There are people who are looking for something that matters to them, looking for something that affects some sense of spirituality that they may already have. And, you know, the minutia don't talk to them,
Right.
but
Yeah.
finding deep meaning will talk to them.
People are always looking for relevance, and that's a huge thing in religion, and that's what has caused a rift. Adele, you had a comment.
It's just the white space has been, you know, in the awareness of the mystics. So many of the teachings that I'm learning now that date way back, meditations that look at, you look at the Aleph, but then you look at the white space and let that come to you. But coming up is Beshalach, coming up next week, which is the Song of the Sea. And the way it's written has meaning, that it's written with open spaces and columns to make this poetry really quite astounding on the page. And that the mystics say this is a soul expanding experience that is happening to the people as they go through this, they cross the sea, and that's reflected in the white space and elongating letters. So there's huge white spaces under letters. So I just find the whole thing fascinating, that there's lots of attention toward the white space, and that the black letters are only seen because of the negative space around them. It's kind of like what Michael said about, you know, creating a shin in sculpture. You need 4 pieces to hold the shin. And so to just see the outside of every letter and see what letters are within letters, like a bet within a pay, and those, there's meaning with all of that. So I just
as an observation,
they're paying attention. Yeah,
you know, thinking about it as you as a dancer and choreographer, what happens with the negative space around your dancers is part of the dance. You
absolutely.
know, Daniel, you know, what happens when there's a rest is part of the music.
Sure.
And without those, it's not dance, it's not music. You know, you have to be aware and feel the importance of that negative space.
That's a great observation.
I think a sculptor goes through the same thing in terms
Yep.
of creating a work of art. And talking of the Song of the Sea, Daniel,
Yeah.
that is relevant to your music. How do you equate that to music? I mean, you know, is there a way of correlating those ideas into creating? I mean, it's almost like, well, I don't even know how to put that into language, but
That's a great question. No, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, I think, you know, there are musical traditions in the Ashkenazic Jewish world, a lot of great music, but a lot of it happened behind closed doors when people were meeting and learning late at night, and they would sing oftentimes for a long time and then learn. And to my mind, the most important music in the Ashkenazic Jewish world happens behind the scenes, and is incredibly relevant in that way. But if like happening like liturgical music that's got an really old origins, you have to go to the Sephardic world, where they, for example, sing everything. Meaning all of the Psuke de Zimra, all of the verses that should be sung, which is part of every prayer service in the morning. The Sephardic tradition, all of them actually, and also the Eastern tradition, the Eastern congregations, they also sing every bit of it. And if you ever want to have a treat, go to a Sephardic synagogue and get there early and just sit and listen to them sing those verses. As a matter of fact, in some Sephardic traditions, on Friday night, they also sing all of the Song of Songs, which is quite beautiful and very inspiring and very romantic, actually, and happy. And just so I think the Sephardic tradition in general and the Eastern tradition have more of a hold on practically what does music mean within the liturgy. In terms of the Song of the Sea, there's some very interesting things that happen and that relate directly to the writing music, which is that the Song of the Sea was about every person there connected to this kind of beyond the source, and had prophetic visions, each one according to their way of doing things, that were the highest prophecy other than Moshe Rabbeinu, other than Moses. And so the Song of the Sea is an example of how we can have a communal experience of song, and we can also have at the very same time an individual perception of that experience, which can be inspiring. And of course, as a composer, that's what it's all about. You want something that can envelop an audience and draw them into your world, but at the same time, you don't want to write to satisfy an audience, because then there's really no point. You could have a computer do it. Meaning it has to be about your personal vision. So yeah.
Michael, you had a comment.
Yeah, there are two visual images that came to mind. One is something that Adele said about the spaces, because in the Torah, normally you have the line written across, and then there's like a big space. It's kind of like a paragraph, so to speak, where there's a big space, and then the next little section begins, whereas there, it's divided up. And if you look at it quickly and kind of throw your eyes out of focus, it looks like when you're looking at the sea and it's windy and you see like a dark sea with the specks of light reflecting off all the little spots. And it never occurred to me that image, which I love when it's windy. If I go to an ocean, I love seeing those. They're not usually high waves, they're low waves, but there's a lot of static going on, and you see the little spots of light. The other one, Lavana, was when you were talking about the hand model. What flashed in my mind was the old IBM typing balls. Before they got to the point of word processors, they wanted to get away from every letter had a thing. So all the letters were on a ball, so you could change the font by changing the ball. And the hand model is kind of like that. It's got all the letters on it. And all you got to do is you type, so to speak, to create. We used it to create from a 3-dimensional to a 2-dimensional, and it showed up on a piece of paper. But if we went from a 2-dimensional to a 5-dimensional, and those letters shot out in light from that little IBM ball as we typed, and suddenly you had this holographic image floating in space, that would be really cool. And in a sense, that's what Stan did in taking the hand model and, without all the motions of the arms, just kind of going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, going and putting out a holographic text, which ties in with the other image as well. So I'm listening to you guys, and these images are popping in my head. And maybe for somebody who didn't understand the words before, one of those images could help to grok what I'm talking about, or what we're collectively talking about. Anyway, that's it.
This is opening up all kinds of imaginative images, and hopefully for our audience as well. A couple of things that Stan said in this piece. He said, well, the only way you can see things on a universal level is through pictograms. Interesting, it was before he was doing the hand gestures, where that became the way you communicate. He also called the Torah, or he referred to it as a motion picture of feelings and sensations. That almost in some way ties into this idea, and Michael, you've mentioned this before, of seeing the sound and hearing the sight, which is what occurred at the revelation in Mount Sinai.
And there you're back on the night that was done, because if that was an all-night thing on Shavuos, that's what the Israelites saw or heard. It said Roim et hakolot. They heard the sounds They
Soft
heard,
sense.
I'm sorry,
It's
they saw
definitely-
ro'im et hakolot
So-
is to see the sounds.
Yeah.
To see the sounds, and yes, seeing the sounds and hearing the colors and so forth is a state of synesthesia, which, if it's not a chronic disease for somebody, is more like an altered state of consciousness.
Well, it's also, I mean, interesting. I mean, we know
On a
that
higher plane.
light is a wave, and so is sound. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, so they're very possible that, I mean, I don't know anything about it, but it's very possible that there's quite literal correlations between the two. Just, I mean, you know, I mean, the Torah is written quite a long time before understanding, which is very recent, of light as both a wave and a particle. But you know,
On the other hand,
When we get back to our three letters, the ayin, I'll have something to say about that, because ayin also means eye, as
Right.
we'll learn shortly, and there is a connection to that.
Mhm.
Yeah, oh, I forgot my thought. Yeah, I think that I really like the direction we're going in this discussion, and I hope to be expounding on this even more. You know, Stan kind of leads us into these things without our knowing it, and you know, most of what we have available is his presentations, his formal presentations based on research. And yes, there were speculations in those. Some of it was historical speculation, but things, you know, that weren't, and he always was very clear to point that out. He did it here. He says, I'm not saying that, you know, Moses, you know.
At that point in the work, it was almost all speculation, except what he had, you know, what he had put together. But yeah.
Yeah, where were we in 1986? He came over to my house with a binder, and he was going through a lot of stuff.
In terms of the research, it was well before the hand model. He was still dealing with the idea of the flame in the tetrahedron, because he was looking at the concept of the contrast between symmetry and asymmetry. It was well, I think that probably places it in terms of landmarks. We were at that point approaching Jewish learning, obviously, since we were at that all-night Shavuos at Kol Shafar. But that journey, as a specific journey, had only just started.
And you had already met Arthur Young, and
that we Arthur Young. I mean, that group, the what can I call it? They used to call themselves the Fundamental Physics Group. There was a whole Arthur Young's Institute for the Study of Consciousness. That whole outer edge scientific community we had already been a part of for almost 10 years when we first moved to the city in the late 70s. Even before, when he was still in this phase of like researching and reading everything and only just starting to put things together when we were living in the city. So we had already known you know, that community for a long time.
All right. Well, it's really great to see this kind of piece evolution. We didn't intend to get into this today. I wanted to show this as an opening, but I think this is really important that we explore these ideas. We've gotten pretty technical in terms of the alphabet, which is extremely important, but it's good to have a little diversion. And, you know, I hope we get it. We'll be getting into more of this down the line because, you know, this is the fun stuff. I think what we're doing with the alphabet may be a little bit more scholarly, I guess you could call it, but important. It's important that we do it. We'll go ahead and end this episode for today as a nice little kind of interlude.
Mhm.
And so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.